clean air, and a healthy environment are inherent and indefeasible rights that belong to all of us, we the people, by virtue of the fact that we are here on earth. Every level of government has an obligation, a substantive obligation to proactively protect our right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. These are rights that don't just belong to the people here today, but they belong to all the future generations yet to come. These are inherent and indefeasible rights, which means it doesn't matter where on earth you are. You have a right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And so that's part of what we are battling for. What a great future! My name is Maya K. Van Rossum. As a child, I played in creeks, rescued injured animals, stood up to bullies, and championed the natural world. I've dedicated my life to protecting the environment and all who inhabit it. At home in the Northeast, I'm an environmental attorney and an advocate for the Delaware River watershed. Now, as the founder of the Green Amendment movement, I've embarked on a nationwide journey to seek, inspire, and secure transformational change for the health of people and their environment. Join me as I meet and share with people across the country and learn about environmental challenges in their communities.
Climate crisis is a reality, but it is sadly a highly contested reality with only the worst of faith.
As we see the increasing effects of global climate change, the communities that are adding to the carbon footprint the least are getting affected the most.
This whole place has turned into a whole new name. It's no longer Otis.
This whole area is called Oil Central now.
The name has changed.
You set up these toxic industries in poorer people of color communities, you're not going to get a lot of protests around any kind of job creation that is happening, and that's not a choice.
You can't represent the interests of oil companies at the same time that you represent the interests of children, of black and brown people, of the American nation, of the human species. Those things are mutually exclusive.
You cannot feel safe in your own home, then there is a problem. And I think our government should not allow people to make your environment not safe.
I grew up here, and my family goes back here generations. And I grew up near the river. And water is life. So I've always been passionate about the environment, and now I feel like I'm in a position to do something about it.
I think New Mexico needs to be given the opportunity to have a say in what they want. The people need to have a say.
The people of New Mexico deserve clean air, water, and land. It's their right, and we need to say it.
So does it make sense to you that we actually add a Green Amendment to the Bill of Rights section of our state Constitution that does actually put environmental rights on par with fundamental rights like free speech and freedom of religion?
Fuck yeah.
In New Mexico, we don't have a right to the things you just mentioned, because I don't think you have a right if it's currently being taken away from you.
Join me as I advocate for the passage of constitutional green amendments that will protect our right to clean air, clean water, a stable climate, and a healthy environment. There's a lot to be concerned about, but there are also thoughtful, powerful people, advocates, and heroes joining the discussion and movement. This is the Green Amendment, New Mexico.
I grew up here, and my family goes back here generations. And I grew up near the river. And water is life. It'll always be that. And so I've always been passionate about the environment, and now I feel like I'm in a position to do something about it.
Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez is just a powerhouse. She is one of the most progressive environmental leaders to come to the New Mexico legislature in recent years, and has quickly been recognized as a rising star. She is super smart, super dedicated, and willing, right, to go out on a limb to do what is right for the environment, for the health and safety of her constituents and the communities of New Mexico, because it's the right thing to do. Might not necessarily be politically expedient, but she recognizes that it's the right thing to do, and so she will do it. So we knew we had a powerful champion in Antoinette Cedillo Lopez.
If you look at who's the most impacted by environmental problems in the state, it's Native people, it's Latinos, also South Valley African American communities, and of course white people. Poor white communities are also impacted. I know there's a family in southern New Mexico where there was a pipeline that burst, and it contained produced water. And it came out of it blew out of the pipeline and fell all over their yard. The chickens died, the dogs died, the children have health problems. And what the company did is they came and they removed the topsoil, which I said is akin to despoliation of evidence. I'm looking and waiting for the consequences of that. There doesn't seem to be much of a consequence to spilling produced water, which then has the potential of contaminating the land and possibly contaminating the water tables, especially if we're talking about high water tables. So it's very disturbing. I have talked to people who are afraid to let their children play in the yard. I've talked to people who have had cancer, unexplained cancer. And as you know, there's been a lot of disposal of radiated water and radiation, uranium. In fact, the Navajos used to mine uranium with no protective equipment. So there's a long heritage of radiation poisoning in the state. And so it's everything, it's our health.
What is the justification by the supporters for the fossil fuel industry for New Mexico to continue to be so supportive of that industry, like allowing fracking, allowing the use of the waste of the water and the produced water bill?
So has the production of oil and gas in the state has increased because of fracking. Unfortunately, the legislature turned more and more to that source of revenue to fund basic government. So they cut taxes on corporations and basic tax giveaways, which was really unfortunate because it's made more and more of our budget reliant on oil and gas, which is an extremely volatile source of funding for our government. But that was a primary justification is, hey, they're funding our education. Hey, they're funding, in fact, that was their advertisement. We're funding education. Well, I noticed they're not advertising that now, that they're not producing because they've shut down their wells. So it's been devastating to New Mexico's economy, and we absolutely have to find alternative sources of revenue. And I think we can do that with clean energy.
The other powerful part of Senator Cedillo Lopez's message is her vision for environmental protection for the state of New Mexico. She really sees the connectivity between the health and the safety of the people, the health of the economy, and the health of the environment. And she takes that very seriously. And she is very passionate and powerful in how she talks about the benefits of a safe and healthy environment for the present and future generations of New Mexico. She is a legislator that has advanced protections against fracking in the state, a very fossil fuel driven state. She is a legislator that has been on the point of many major progressive environmental protections coming out of the New Mexico legislature in recent years. And so having this dedicated, visionary voice for the environment rise up as the lead champion for New Mexico's Green Amendment has been very compelling for the people of New Mexico and very powerful for the New Mexico Green Amendment movement. Emma Rose Cohen is a is the founder of the company Final, creator of this magnificent Final Straw product that not only is good for the environment, but it's a great way to get people involved in environmental protection in the actions and activities that they do, but also in starting to think about the contribution they can make towards environmental protection and all the different forms that can take. When I actually sat down with Emma Rose, it was really inspirational. This is a woman who has a vision and is just dedicated to seeing it through and will take on any challenge and overcome all hurdles to advance her vision for making a change for the environment and for our communities. And she doesn't just, she hasn't just taken her business savvy and her business smarts and her great ideas to create products that help us all protect the environment, but she is reinvesting her profits in helping to support good environmental causes. And equally as important, because she is now such a savvy, well-recognized leader in the business community, she is using her voice, her knowledge, her dedication to environmental protection to challenge other leaders. And not only is she challenging them, but more importantly, she's inspiring them to want to rise up and carry forth that message of businesses are all a part of our community and have an important and irreplaceable role and responsibility to advance their business operations in a way that helps protect our environment and protect our communities at the same time that they are creating jobs and helping to advance economic development. The two are not mutually exclusive. Emma Rose Cohen sees that very, very clearly, and she is making sure that her business colleagues and counterparts see that same message and don't just see it, but act upon it.
I obviously focus on plastic because it's an easy one for me to pick out. But this applies to every industry. And when I worked at the lab, so I was at Los Alamos National Laboratory for 4 years, and I worked in waste minimization. So we helped different scientific groups around the laboratory minimize their waste at the source. And everything that we did was based on a return on investment. So we weren't just going out there doing these charitable acts to help the earth. This was about saving money and therefore making money for the lab. And our program saved millions for the lab. So one of the projects that I worked on was an industrial composter. So we installed an industrial composter at the wastewater treatment facility because they were trucking off all of the biosolid waste, which was incredibly expensive. But by shifting to this industrial composter, it saved the lab millions over years. So there really is a financial argument for waste minimization, especially when you look at source reduction. Even, bringing it back to plastics, with all the rise of takeout as a result of COVID, everyone is getting takeout food now. And how many of those bags have plastic cutlery in them? Well, the restaurants are paying for that plastic cutlery, and then generally the takeout is just going to your house where you have metal, silverware. So it would actually save restaurants money to not put the plastic cutlery in there. And yes, it's, a couple cents and maybe a couple bucks a day, but at the end of the day, restaurants have very small margins and it adds up over time. So what we're doing at Final is we're obviously speaking with individuals, so inspiring people to change their individual behavior. At the end of the day, if we all give up single-use plastic straws, we're still going to have a massive plastic pollution problem, which is why this is about a grassroots movement to inspire larger policy and legislative changes. So extended producer responsibility is a policy approach that holds companies accountable for the waste that they create from cradle to grave. So if a company creates a beverage in a single-use plastic bottle, they then need to either recycle or dispose of that on their own dime. Currently, taxpayers pay for 90% of recycling efforts, and recycling isn't cheap. So To add to the compounding complexity of this issue, we used to send all of our recycling to China, and back in 2018 back in 2018 they said no thanks and stopped taking all of our recycling because we were sending highly contaminated waste to them. And as a country of however many billion people, they don't need that kind of volume. So currently we have nowhere to send our plastic, and so it's just going to landfill. So a lot of people think, oh, if I recycle this plastic bottle, it's going to end up in this endless loop of reincarnation, and a beautiful karmic circle. But that's not what happens. Plastic gets downgraded. So it maybe, if it does make it around, and 91% of plastic does not get recycled. So if it is of the lucky 9% that does get recycled, it gets recycled once or downgraded into something like plastic lumber or polar fleece that then can't be recycled. So this is a very complex issue because of where the materials are going, and we don't really have an outlet for them. So extended producer responsibility doesn't just apply to physical waste. It can apply to stuff getting put into the air, into our soil, really holding companies accountable for the waste that they're creating, because they're making a lot of money on it, and then taxpayers or whoever besides for the company has to end up paying for it.
So when you're speaking with other corporate leaders, maybe at conferences or one-on-one or wherever it is you all get together and speak, how are they reacting to your message that they, like you, should take responsibility for the decisions as corporate leaders they are making?
Unfortunately, it really depends on the corporation, because ultimately you have some corporations that are of the belief in the triple bottom line, which is measuring success based on three things: people, planet, and profit. Most corporations are just looking at profit, especially if they're public. They have a legal binding agreement to their shareholders to maximize profit, regardless of the environmental or social impact. So I think everyone thinks it's a nice idea, extended producer responsibility, but in terms of follow through, you don't see a lot. And then there is a lot of greenwashing in it. You see some companies, agreeing to take back electronics, but then where are they ending up? They're just going right to a landfill or getting dumped somewhere.
Do you think now again, this is thinking about you as a person who's grown up here in New Mexico, that environmental racism and this disproportionate impact on communities of color and low-income communities and indigenous communities, is that a problem here in New Mexico?
Absolutely. I think it's a problem everywhere in the world. Not only with these toxic runoffs and locations of manufacturing plants, but obviously, as we see the increasing effects of global climate change, the communities that are adding to the carbon footprint the least are getting affected the most, and they don't have the resources to better their circumstances like we do here in the first world. I did a master's program at Harvard in sustainability and environmental management, and this wasn't really a topic that was discussed. So when the BLM movement really started gaining a lot of traction in 2020, and then from that we saw the term intersectional environmentalism being coined, it really opened my eyes to something in my industry that I'd been working in for over a decade that I hadn't put enough time into. So it was a lot of reflection for myself in terms of like where I'm focusing and how these issues impact different communities disproportionately. So the term intersectional environmentalism is basically where social justice and environmentalism meet, and it helps to amplify the voices of those who are disproportionately affected by things like fracking, location of landfills, toxic runoff from manufacturing, all of these things that white privileged communities don't really have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And yet, the location of these facilities is always strategically located near lower income communities and communities with people of color. I know that these problems are really big and it can feel paralyzing. I mean, I have moments myself where I read an article and I'm just like, oh my gosh, what could I do? But it really is in those moments that we have to go within and realize that We are so powerful, and each and every one of our voices is equally powerful. So right now, it's really important to vote. Actually, it's just always really important to vote. This is how we exercise our right of freedom of speech, of, you know, changing the world around us beyond voting. And I know that that is not even a right that everyone fully has. You know, how are you speaking to your community? How are you spreading the message of what you believe in? It doesn't matter if it's, you know, plastics or even environmentally based. Maybe it's a social cause, but everyone has something that makes them tick and fires them up. And so use that to make change in your community, because every single one of us is powerful and has the potential to change the world.
I used to draw maps, big ones with crayons and colored pencils and stencils and all of that. I wanted to choreograph the rivers and arroyos. Even when water don't, time flows, apply a timeline to those deer tracks. Paint some grandeur on my cadaver of a tree and call that an escape route. I used to draw maps. I thought that they were very truly important. Maybe that's the colonizer in me. Maybe I was trying to paint a portrait inside as a scary place I'ma form a home with. Dead twigs, pine cones, red dirt I don't own, my grandpa's bones. From this permanent old folks home and sap, I used to draw maps. I'm drawn back, but they draw a match like a gun. They strike it on black and brown human beings, communities of kerosene till it's bright like the sun. They fan it with words like profit, progress, and God-given. They draw lines in the earth like an autopsy prize in the area, and people not worth wanting, they need the right to hurt. That's why they draw maps.
The voice of young people in the Green Amendment movement and in the movement for environmental protection, environmental justice reform is truly irreplaceable for a number of reasons. Obviously, they're the ones that are going to suffer the consequences of the decisions that are being made today. And if we make the wrong decisions and we burden them with a climate crisis that is out of control and irreversible and inflicting irreversible damage, you know, the moral consequences of that is on us. But the physical, the emotional, the health, the safety, the quality of life, the everything consequences is on the young people of today and future generations. They can see their future. They know what lies ahead. And it is irresponsible and immoral for any legislator or decision maker to discount the voice of young people.
My name is Artemisio Romero y Carver. A queer Chicane activist. I work and I'm one of the co-founders of Yucca, Youth United for Climate Crisis Action, and I'm a high school senior at the New Mexico School for the Arts.
So can you tell us about Yucca, what the mission is, how long it's been around, and how you do your work of fighting to attack the climate crisis?
Yeah, so Yucca stands for Youth United for Climate Crisis Action. It's also the name of a plant that's indigenous to New Mexico, the yucca plant. And the root of the yucca plant can be made into a kind of soap, a kind of shampoo that can be used to clean. And so we like to think about ourselves as engaging in some kind of process of cleansing, of healing, right, through a natural source. So what Yucca does is primarily works on campaigns on a state, government, and local level to push renewable, just climate action and policy with an emphasis on environmental racism.
When you go and speak to decision makers, right, whether it's legislators, regulators, you know, people in power, and you talk with them about your personal story, you talk with them about your future and the climate crisis and what it might mean for you, do they listen to your voice? Do they listen to you because of the power of your youthful perspective, or are they dismissive?
When I confront politicians, because it often is not a conversation, it's often a confrontation. Mm-hmm. Climate crisis is a reality, but it is sadly a highly contested reality with only the worst of faith. So often when I'm in conversation with politicians, both on a state and federal level, right? When I talk to those people, I find often that they've done two things. First of all, they're in deep denial of reality. And second, that they've taken that denial of reality and created an entire political agenda based on that denial. And often, I don't think it's a deeply evil or sinister denial. It's a denial that comes out of fear, right? It's an understanding of, yeah, the climate matters, my children's lives matter. I also need funding for my next campaign. So then they start to hold two truths at the same time, that the oil industry can fund my campaign, and I can also care about children, and I can also care about the planet. But that's not true. You can't represent the interests of oil companies at the same time that you represent the interests of children, of black and brown people, of the American nation, of the human species. Those things are mutually exclusive.
You know, it's really hard to describe the impact of my conversation with Arte and the opportunities I've had to work with him since our interview to collaborate on advancing a New Mexico Green Amendment movement. His vision and dedication to and for change when it comes to environmental justice, when it comes to social justice, and when it comes to generational justice really is unmatched by anybody else that I've met. And the way he has of describing and sharing his dedication and his vision and his call for change is really transformational.
The world is on the brink of collapse because of Western culture and because of colonial land practice, right? It's because of a profit incentive. And when we have these extractive industries, where are they centered? They're centered in sacrifice zones deemed by the Nixon administration to put, heavy pollutant facilities right next to black and brown communities, right? To offload that hurt into the most vulnerable people. So the oil industry, in the way that it puts fracking sites on indigenous land, right? In the way that the San Juan coal plant, which I think recently closed, but was located very near the reservations, potentially on reservation land, the way that all of that stuff is housed is with the premise that black and brown lives, that people of color, our lives, are worth less than white lives and are a worthwhile sacrifice to produce another gallon of oil or some more coal. And that's the origins of the climate crisis. That pollution starts because of racial violence. And then when the climate collapses, when we have massive pollution, when we have rising temperatures and rising waters, the effects are going to be felt and are being felt the most by already marginalized communities. Again, black and brown communities, right? When we had COVID and the pandemic rise across this nation, across the globe, the people immediately hurt the most and having some of the highest rates were indigenous people, in part because we know that COVID-19 is exacerbated if you've been living near a source of air pollution. And those are deaths that can be attributed to COVID-19, but can also be attributed to the oil industry, which is a murderous white supremacist industry. And so for me, climate work, environmental justice work, racial justice work, abolitionist work are all the same thing.
I come into this work as a mother first and foremost, and I don't want to be doing these things. I want to be working in my garden and having fun with my family, but we have to get involved in these things that really hurt our heart and that really just with the culture that doesn't respect or honor the sacred, doesn't even know what that is anymore, and doesn't care, frankly. And to the point where our indigenous women and families and relatives are being missing and murdered on another pandemic scale, because of these things happening to our land and water, because of these things happening to continue the breakdown within our communities, where we don't have the resources to address the crisis in our own communities, So you can, it's just all levels, and it's not to say that we don't have a lot of strengths, that I don't have a lot of hope, that I find in other ways, but yeah, it's just like, I feel like the seeds and the water, that ability to feed ourselves is everything. So you absolutely need a clean environment to do that, you know. And there's ways we could adapt, that we'll have to adapt. And I think that's combining Western science and technology with indigenous science and technology. There's a place where the two can come together and address the urgency of these issues, and how we need to go about things, because there is an urgency. So yeah, it's a lot of what we do is harm reduction for a lot of things that are happening. Yep. Hello, my name is Beata Sosi Pena. I'm from Santa Clara Pueblo and also grew up in El Rito. And I work for Tewa Women United in our Environmental Health and Justice program as a program coordinator. And I'm also project manager for the Espanola Healing Foods Oasis and Espanola Seed Library. And I've been working in our environmental justice program for close to 12 years now. We do a lot of advocacy around the nuclear weapons production happening in our ancestral homelands here. We're also involved in Communities for Clean Water Coalition, Frack Off Greater Chaco Coalition, that we do a lot of work for environmental issues of concern, and try to just keep tabs on local issues like that. And then we also do a lot of food and seed sovereignty work, which is more strength-based, which is more what I'm passionate about, is our traditional foods and land-based existence and culture, and do a lot of mentoring with young people as well. So that's a lot of what we do here. And you know, this garden is actually where we're at. The Espanola Healing Foods Oasis is actually a response to a lot of the environmental issues we face here in Espanola and surrounding pueblos.
The sacrifice of Native American communities to the fracking industry is quite overwhelming. And to see how they are being forced to be exposed to the air pollution and the water pollution, the overuse of the water extraction, the noise, the light pollution, and the habitat, environmental, and health and safety harms of the industry is really stark and overwhelming. And there is a lot of concern about the historic seeds and food source of Native American communities, that seeds and food are a rich and important part of the Native American culture that over years has been stripped away from them in a variety of ways, and been really lost to them. And so Beata and Tewa Women United are working really hard to connect Native American peoples back with their historic food sources, right? The native plants and herbs and seeds and history behind the foods. And there's a really important focus on protecting the water for Native American communities. Water is quite limited in the state of New Mexico. And it is a real concern to see the quality of the water being sacrificed for industry, but also industry and others being allowed to suck the water up out of the environment for industrial and economic uses, and depriving people and the environment and wildlife and natural resources of the state of that critical life-sustaining element of our earth. I believe that I read this in some of the materials about Tewa Women United and some of your work. Water as our first environment. What does that mean to you and your work and to your organization?
So when we talk about water as our first environment, it's building off of Mohawk midwife Gudgy Cook's teachings around women as the first environment and the intersections between environmental health and reproductive justice. So we know that what happens to the land happens to our bodies, has been coined from other movements with indigenous environmental movements. And yeah, it's really coming from that way of our cultural way of knowing and Tewa way of knowing of how we are our water beings, first and foremost. How water has that ability to speak to water. And from a deep love and respect of water, living in a southwest region since time immemorial. And water as our first environment is really referring to our the womb waters that we come from before we're born. And so that we have an advocacy model of Navatoijia, which is land worker mother. And what it's asking is that every policy, every intention starts to center indigenous pregnant people and indigenous pregnant women in all their decisions, or whatever decisions are happening, or whatever work is happening. Because if they're protected, everybody's protected.
It was so heartwarming and inspiring and a relief and exciting to hear her thoughts on the concept of recognizing environmental rights for all people, including future generations. And more importantly, how she viewed the power and the importance of a healthy environment and the way we people are connected with the environment, are connected with water. Her talking about how we all begin in water. This is a vision of Tewa Women United, how we all begin in water. And to be honest with you, when she first started talking about that, I was thinking, we're made up of water, where, water is an important part of the environment. It's important of every aspect of our lives. And then I asked her the question about this idea that we all begin water. And when she talked about the waters of the womb, it was like an epiphany. It was like, yeah, we do all begin in water. And then to hear how beautifully and powerfully she talked about, the start of life for people beginning in water, and then how important water is throughout the entirety of our lives, was just really captivating. And moving, and really moving. And you can just, as a mother, as an advocate, as a leader, as a Native American leader, as a leader in a community that has been constantly and consistently challenged with environmental harm intentionally by government officials, literally, again, sacrificing, being, government leaders willing and wanting and intending to sacrifice Native American communities and communities of color over and over and over and over again in order to benefit their richer, whiter friends elsewhere, and to hear somebody talk about how sad it is to experience that, but also talk about how powerfully she and Tewa Women United and her communities were unwilling to accept that lot that government officials were trying to foist upon them in this modern era, was just so, I don't even know if inspirational is the word. I mean, just the dedication and the endurance and the toughness and the strength and the love that it takes to take on those challenges for her community day in and day out is just so awesome and awe-inspiring.
I think personally what draws me to this work, and it's kind of a calling to be a land worker, to be a seed keeper, to do birth work, and it really is about commitment to life, a commitment to the future, commitment to healing, and it's also come at a cost of when you know, you know. When you understand the bigger picture of things, you can't not know, and then you have a responsibility to carry that information forward, or like how you are carrying, like when you know something good that you believe in and have faith in, you have a responsibility to share that with others, you know. And when you see a solution, when you see something that can help, that extends that care, it is a responsibility to carry that forward in some way and to share it with others. And so what I know to be true and good, that is still being passed on, like I have a commitment to carry that on, because of what I mentioned, because of just what my relatives and ancestors endured for me to be here, and still have this corn that we've been growing, you know, to still have this, to still know where our natural springs are and to go and tend to them, to still know where to harvest all my plant medicine seasonally throughout the year, and to get to know those relatives in an intimate way and help care for each other. And yeah, I have a lot of love for my children and for the children of our communities. They don't know all the time that they're loved and cared for as much as they are. We have high rates of suicide with our young people, whether it's like losing them through addiction, through there's a lot of despair with them, but there's also a lot of strength that when they tap into it, you know, they have it. And yeah, I do this because I want them to see how we love them. And you have to show love and care through your actions, not just talking about the problems, not just talking about, not doing data gathering or research or any kind of circles where we like have to go around and around the issues about colonialism and why it's bad with people who pretend like they don't understand. Because we're literally dying at really high rates disproportionately to other communities. And we deserve better. We deserve to live, we deserve to thrive, not just survive. You know, we deserve to have everything we need in place so that we shouldn't even have to worry. Where's the reprieve for our communities? You know, so that we can start to put that collective knowledge back together as a whole. And I know that healing can't come unless we have our water rights, that can't come unless we have our land back. It can't come unless we're no longer discriminated against, or that our worldview is seen as less than science, Western science, or government. It'll never happen unless that's reversed. And so any steps that we can take in that direction is a good thing.
But this is a compression station, and they do some stuff there. We have a tank battery, and you have some limited refining right there.
And then your house is just...
My house is just over there.
Just right there within sight distance.
Yeah, you can see it. There's no one checking. Do you know what the composition is coming up out of the well? Is it radioactive? We don't know. Is that one radioactive? I don't know. And they'll say, well, it's norm. And again, it's another word. It's a euphemism. You know, it's norm. What's norm? Naturally occurring radioactive material.
The tanks and the flare and the tanks and then the drill rig.
Oh, this is...
And the drill rig and the tanks. Like, are these all Is this all, drill and store and pipe?
This is all within the last 7 years.
And what are all the different operations that?
You have a refining operation, you have a tank battery, you have a compressor right there that's over there for that. You have another tank battery. You have a burner here, that's the flare, and you have another burner on the back side toward these other people, which is a newer burner, and they actually consumes it inside of a column. And you'll see the base of it glow. And then they come in and they fold up their operation and haul that stuff where? We have what's called a land farm. All the contaminated dirt goes to a land farm between Carlsbad and Hobbs. There's a huge pile of dirt, size of a ship, Navy ship, piled out there, coming from all these sites, dumped out there. And we're a sacrifice, John. That's what we are. We're just left. And everybody up wherever they are, they don't know, they don't live here. Would they want to live here? That executive that owns this company, would he like to live here? I don't think he would.
They used to be working farms at one time. He came here when his family he was like maybe 9. And he planted these trees when he was just a little kid.
Wow.
And I love these trees. I've been coming back for years and trying to make sure that they're safe.
Even when he was in the Navy, he went to the Navy, but he'd always come back to this property. It had always been his family home. He'd go and he'd live someplace else, but he'd always come back here because this was home. He told me all the stories about growing up here, about chasing lizards in the field over here, and about the rabbits, and his brother and him when they had an owl out here, and about catching the bus and having to run across the field and the bull chasing him, and
oh yeah,
all the stories and stuff about growing up out here. It was like, and when he first grew up out here, there was nothing out here. It was just, this wasn't even Thomason, it was just Star Route. There was nothing out here. It was just him.
It's a dirt road.
Yeah, there's all this development out here now, but there wasn't nothing out here when he was out here.
We were here, the house beside us, the house on the hill, and the house back there had just been built.
So, the things grew up around him. It was just him and his family pretty much when they first moved out here. So it was kind of cool to hear these stories about him growing up out here, and it was like his family home, and I kind of like to hear that they have these roots on this property. It's kind of neat.
Literally, the roots.
The roots, yeah, the roots, yeah, are here.
I'm making a nest.
You making a nest for the birds?
Yeah.
She's making a nest for the birds to heal the tree.
To make the tree better for the birds, because the tree's sick.
Sky, that is so nice.
Because all the birds went away. All the birds went away because the tree's sick. So you're going to make a nest.
Make it feel better.
So maybe they'll come back.
Look. I think it's more.
This boom happened, it just seemed like...
But this is a fracking.
This is
different than the old.
This is different than that. These wells those old wells were scattered around. These are right on top of you. And there's a lot of them. There's not just one, there's 24, 25 scattered around us.
You can take it off.
I found-
They're over there.
I found the website, OCD, when I'm going to these meetings, I found the website and it'll pinpoint all the wells. And there's a ton of wells. And just right here, and then it just goes that way forever.
We had, at one time we had 27 wells within a mile of us. Was it like within 2 miles of us? 27.
How quickly did they come? Was it one and then one, or was it like...
It started with
It started with just this one that's
Mac
right
Energy
here.
come right back here.
And that started, what, seven years?
Almost 7 years.
About 7 years ago, and it was like just right there.
Um,
And then it just kind of snowballed from there.
We met with Penny and Dee in their backyard, and this was Dee's family home. He had grown up there the entirety of his life, pretty much, since a young boy. And, you know, he told these beautiful stories about the beautiful nature that used to surround his home and all the antics him and his friends got in, playing in the water and chasing the critters and the things that they would see and hear in nature. And it was so beautiful, and you could just see it, right? You could just imagine what he was seeing when he looked around him, you know, when he was remembering that past. And you could see that Penny had totally embraced that history, and that was like part of her vision of the area. And then you could see, right, when they came back to the present moment, and they looked around at the reality of what they were surrounded by, and it was no longer beautiful nature and wildlife and healthy habitats, but it was the fossil fuel industry.
And so it's coated this, and it's coated that out there. You can see the height of the telephone pole. It was shooting way over the top of the telephone pole.
Penny and Dee were asleep one night, and Penny started to hear, you know, stuff happening outside.
And I'm like, what in the world is that?
And so she got herself together, and she went out of their home into their yard, and it was raining. She thought that there was this really intense rain.
I met with this rain. It's like this misty rain, and it's burning my eyes.
But then suddenly her eyes were burning and her skin was burning. And what she realized was that this was not rainwater that was falling down upon her and her home and her garden and her family home, but that this was toxic frack wastewater.
You can see the height of the telephone pole. It was shooting way over the top of the telephone pole.
Spewing out of the local drilling operations, literally raining toxic wastewater down on her and her family.
My animals! The first thing I'm thinking is, my God, my animals. They're out here in this yard right here where we're sitting.
Of course, as you can imagine, she was quick to make sure that her kids stayed inside, right? But then she described the physical and impacts that she was experiencing as that toxic water rained down on their home.
And the longer we've been here, the sicker we're getting. My throat is swollen up. Yeah, my throat's swollen up. She's getting headaches and getting sick, and nosebleeds.
My son has had so many nosebleeds. He's had to have He's had to have his nose cauterized 3 times, and he still has nosebleeds. We all have headaches. He's had a tumor on his tongue, which he's had biopsied. Thankfully, it was not cancer, but they say it's consistent with
pollution.
High pollution area. And so he has to keep going back to have it monitored in case it turns into cancer.
Cancer, it could be.
And he keeps gagging on all his food because of it. And I was I have a tumor on my thyroid, which I just had biopsied, which I'm waiting for the results for.
So things are cropping up.
Things are coming up. I mean, it's not livable. I mean, it's still too high for people to live here.
And they left us here for 8 months, and it's evaporated under us, and we breathed it. Anywhere you walk out here, you're carrying the stuff on your feet.
And you know,
and
we
you
used
drive
to
up
have
in your car, it goes with you.
We used to have a ton of birds in these trees. I used to call these my bird condos, you know.
Do you notice how quiet it is?
Yeah, do you see birds in these trees?
The toxic radioactive frack wastewater can, as you hear them describe it, can still be found in the soils around their family home, is still creating environmental problems and health problems.
These guys start cleaning up this site. They're over there digging the dirt out. And I'm like, are you gonna come take the dirt off my property?
They never did.
A green amendment becomes an opportunity for these people and these families to say that the government's failure to hold industry accountable, to clean up the toxic radioactive wastewater that exists in my backyard because of the government decision and the failed laws and the failed permits and the failed permitting and the failed actions and activities by government that allowed this industry to so infect my soil and my home. That is a violation of my constitutional right. And so that it is incumbent on government to have to act to force a restoration of the violation.
I don't go up to somebody and spit in their face. Why would, if I went up and spit in somebody's face, I'd get in a lot of trouble, right? And yet, we have these companies that are allowed to just chug out toxins. And it's coming into my lungs. It's coming into my house. That's pretty much spitting in my face. That's just like coming into me and going, don't you think? It's just like spitting in my face.
What does this do to you and your soul and your heart?
I hurt all the time. In the middle of me, I hurt. And it's a risk for my whole family. I have nowhere to go. Can't just leave, can I? I keep wanting to leave.
Right now, the Aucoins seem to have no option. Nobody seems to care that there is toxic radioactive waste still infesting the soils and the property around their family home. And there seems to be little that they can do. Of course, there are traditional lawsuits that can be brought for damages and things. And, I hope that they are pursuing those. But, there needs to be a way to hold government officials to account for their failures to protect the Aucoins, to force the cleanup of the site right when it happened, when there was the greatest opportunity to do a full cleanup that would have best protected the Aucoins and their environment.
Well, and then when these guys are gone and they're bankrupt, who's gonna fix this?
Right.
They didn't put money up. They should be putting up money for every one of these wells, a bond, just in case something happens. God forbid it should happen in the first place. Should never have happened. This was their fault. That's not standard practice to leave a pipe on top of the ground. And that close, and at that amount of pressure, enough that it's over the top of the telephone pole and shooting across onto people, onto their houses. It's too close. Even the oil field workers that come out said, you're too close. And I'm like, I was here first.
Are you surprised? And are the people that in your circle, do you think, would they be surprised to understand that they have an enforceable constitutional right to free speech and to bear arms, but not to clean water and clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely ludicrous that we have all of these rights written into our day-to-day lives that don't include the basic human right to have a healthy environment.
I think it should be bipartisan. I think everybody in our state wants to ensure that they have beautiful clean air and water, and farming and agriculture and ranching is so important to our state. I just can't imagine that people would have a problem with ensuring that all of that is protected for us and for future generations.
Yeah, if there's any hope for reversing what's been done and returning our lands to their pristine state, that has to be part of our inalienable rights, you know, part of our, and it's now might be the time, you know, like where there's colonial statues coming down and people are rejecting that value system across the country, and people are wanting equity for our fellow humanity. For the most part,
If we don't change now, in 50 years, we're gonna have to do it like that. So this is actually giving us a runway in order to change slowly, to get people accustomed to the ideas, to find and build new industries where people can work, versus in 50 years when we're in like a crazy massive drought and everything's gone to hell in a handbasket. We're gonna have to make really big changes, and we're gonna see a much larger economic impact than if these changes were made now over a slower period of time.
What that Green Amendment is going to be the beginning of limiting or providing them with guidance as to what they're supposed to be writing these laws for.
The Bill of Rights is a place where we speak about our human rights. And in our priority of rights, the ability to breathe, the ability to have clean food, or food that is not contaminated, the ability to drink clean water, those are basic human fundamental rights. They belong in our Constitution.
What is the point of the Constitution but to protect and serve the people? So this document was written to ensure that all people have equal rights, and yet it's not functioning on a very basic sense of our environment. So if the Constitution is built to give us basic human rights, and yet those rights are not being afforded equally in terms of environmental protection, then we absolutely need an amendment that protects people for that. These are new problems. This isn't a problem that was, you know, present when the Constitution was written. So because we live in a modern day society with, you know, cell phones and fax machines are not a thing anymore, we obviously need to change and interpret the law in such a way to protect the problems of today.
I think having a Green Amendment in New Mexico would first of all give us an incredible tool to hold politicians accountable, and could also help us restructure what our government does, what it exists to do, right? We can get on paper, in Constitution, leadership within the government of New Mexico saying that, hey, my job as an elected official is to protect your future as a young generation, or to protect your future as people of color experiencing higher rates of air pollution. That's my job, because I'm elected by you, so I should recognize those rights and I should preserve them. If we can get that promise, then that means one of two things. Either that promise is kept, right, and we have environments, communities that will be treated better. We have a livable future for future generations. Or that promise will be broken like it already has always been. But when that promise is broken, we can say, hey, remember when you wrote it down in the state constitution that this was your job, because you're not doing your job. And if you're not doing your job, you're not going to be reelected. And so be able to say, hey, you're taking something from us. You've recognized that it was ours. And so now when you take it, we can hold you accountable. And I see that as the tool and the advantage and the hope that a Green Amendment could offer.